Daenerys Targaryen stood on the battlements of Dragonstone, her silver-gold hair dancing in the sea breeze. She stared at the restless waters stretching toward King's Landing and felt the weight of 1,000 generations bearing down upon her. Enemies lurked in those waters, enemies she had allowed to ambush her once. The memory was fresh, the shriek of ballista bolts cleaving the air, striking Rhaegal, wounding him. His blood had spattered the sea, the wound searing Daenerys' heart with rage. But she had retreated then, reigning in her fury. She had not risked her children further. Now another day had dawned, and if she had her way, her dragons would never be taken by surprise again. Tyrion Lannister's voice approached from behind, soft footsteps on the stone. "Your Grace," he said, his words carefully measured. She turned to him, finding him looking more somber than usual. His mismatched eyes carried worry and intention. She could practically hear the gears turning in his mind, planning strategies and second guesses. "You wish to remind me of the cost," she said quietly. She did not need him to speak first. She knew how this conversation would go. She had lost too many people, Yora, Missandei, half her forces in the north. And she had nearly lost Rhaegal. That near death had awakened something inside her, a protective fury to safeguard what was left of her blood. Tyrion inclined his head. "We can't suffer another ambush by Euron Greyjoy." He tapped his fingers against the stone parapet. "Cersei has been preparing for us. She wants you furious and patient. We need to be decisive, yes, but methodical as well. One more scorpion bolt, one stroke of misfortune, and we lose another dragon." She let her gaze drift across the horizon, where the sun glistened off 1,000 tiny waves. "Then we will not be caught unawares. I will not simply sail straight into Blackwater Bay." She took a breath, reminded herself of her entire reason for fighting. "I will not lose anyone else to a trick of the Lannisters. We will destroy the Iron Fleet first." Those words hung in the air, heavy but full of a sharp, crystalline purpose. She thought of Drogon and Rhaegal, how they soared too high now for scorpions to reach them, and how she needed to hold back their wrath until just the right moment. If she could cripple Euron's ships, she could rid herself of the greatest immediate threat, those ballista-laden vessels. She was done reacting. This time, she would strike on her own terms. Tyrion exhaled, a thoughtful hum escaping his lips. "I've spoken to Yara Greyjoy," he said. "She and her remaining ships can harass Euron from the west, possibly even draw him out from his vantage point near King's Landing. If we coordinate with them." But Daenerys' expression set like newly forged steel. "I will go myself, Hand of the Queen. I will take the skies with my dragons." She paused, and her gaze fell to Tyrion in a way that was almost kind. "I appreciate your counsel, but I will not let them rest easy for one moment more. Missandei, Yura, they would still be alive if I had been more careful. So now I will be careful and decisive. Rhaegal will not be left behind." Tyrion bowed, though she sensed his reservations. She also sensed the conflict roiling inside him. A desire for peace warring with the necessity of war. But her anger flared in her chest, unstoppable in its righteous fury. She resolved not to let that anger consume her reason. This was her vow. When she entered the council chamber, Grey Worm already stood at attention. Varys hovered in a corner like an uneasy shadow, hands clasped. The spider's eyes flicked over Daenerys' face, as though trying to read her mood. He must have found some measure of comfort or worry there, for his lips tightened into a small line. Daenerys spread a map of the Blackwater Bay on the wooden table. "We sail from Dragonstone at dawn," she said. "I will keep Rhaegal and Drogon in the air, out of range, and watch for Euron's approach. My fleet will remain outside the Scorpion's reach until I signal. Once Euron shows himself, we do not fight on the defensive. We strike." Varys exchanged glances with Tyrion. "They'll expect you to come in with your dragons blazing," Varys said, voice as light as a whisper. "They will have reloaded their scorpions. Euron is cunning." Daenerys' eyes turned to Grey Worm. "We have enough intelligence from Yara that Euron's ships are more scattered than in our last engagement. The majority are in the harbor, moored near King's Landing. If we hit them in open water rather than the bay, we minimize the vantage for Cersei's towers." Grey Worm shifted. "The Unsullied will be prepared for battle, but many of your men are weary from the long night." Daenerys' expression softened for a moment. The memory of the dead swarming Winterfell's battlements lingered in her mind like a nightmare unshaken. She remembered the men and women who fought by torchlight against an unthinking, unrelenting tide of death. So many had perished, and yet the living had emerged victorious, at a cost beyond measure. "We will give them time to rest," she said, "but only enough to keep them standing. I cannot allow Cersei to muster more scorpions or procure more allies. Day by day, our advantage erodes. If we fail to strike now, we lose our chance." No one contested her. The plan was set. That night, Daenerys stood in the courtyard where her dragons often perched. Drogon had grown even larger, his black scales shimmering under the moonlight as he coiled his tail. Rhaegal was more restless, unsettled by the memory of pain inflicted by those ballista bolts. The green dragon's golden eyes narrowed at the slightest motion in the night. She approached slowly, letting him smell her presence, letting him see she posed no threat. A quiet croon escaped Rhaegal, a mixture of greeting and lingering unease. She placed a palm to his scaly flank, inhaling the unique leathery scent. The wound on Rhaegal's side was still healing, a patch of pinkish scar tissue ringed by the impressions of scales that had fallen out. "I won't let them hurt you again," she whispered. She knew the dragon understood the intention if not the words. He exhaled, warm breath filling the courtyard. Gently, she put her other hand on his jaw, guiding his head to lean against her. Behind her, Drogon watched, protective. "Tomorrow you fly with me. We end the threat of those scorpions once and for all." She felt a flare of both apprehension and grim resolve in her chest. Daenerys had once believed that claiming a throne was straightforward. Gather an army, ride her dragons, break the wheel. But each day since she'd arrived in Westeros had taught her how cunning her enemies were, how steeped in cruelty. King's Landing's inhabitants, especially under Cersei's rule, seemed to teeter constantly on the brink of despair, waiting for any spark to light the fires of chaos. She had to be more than just a conqueror. She had to be a just ruler. Yet some part of her recognized that justice in these times might require acts of swift, relentless violence. She stayed with Rhaegal until the moon rose high, stroking his scales, whispering quiet reassurances. At times she closed her eyes, remembering the day she first soared on Drogon's back. She remembered the sense of absolute freedom, unchained by the earth. Rhaegal would share that with her again. Only this time it was life or death for them both. At dawn, the beach at Dragonstone rippled with activity. Gulls squawked overhead, swooping low over lines of soldiers preparing for embarkation. A faint mist clung to the sand, swirling around unsullied spears and Dothraki rocks. The sea breeze carried the mingled scents of salt and horse sweat. Daenerys stood on a ridge, dressed in her riding leathers, thick enough to protect from the wind and cold at high altitudes. She wore no crown. She had decided long ago that such ornaments were better saved for after she had the throne she believed was hers by right. Grey Worm directed the orderly boarding of ships, guiding regiments of Unsullied in neat files. The Dothraki were more chaotic, but they followed her unwaveringly. Tyrion arrived astride a horse, an awkward sight for him, though he hid it well enough. "We're ready, Your Grace," he said, pulling up beside her. "Once the vanguard sets sail, you'll take to the skies?" She nodded, gazing toward the water where two of her large vessels were already unfurling sails. "Yes, Drogon and Rhaegal will wait until the fleet is a safe distance from Dragonstone, so as not to cause confusion if the dragons rise too soon. I don't want any mistakes." He bowed, then reined his horse around, prepared to lead. But before he left, he paused, looking back at her. "Just remember that a single victory may not mean the city kneels. We still have to contend with the Golden Company, with Cersei's cunning." She gave a small, mirthless smile. "I haven't forgotten." When at last the ships had pulled away from the shore, the beach nearly empty of men and horses, Daenerys climbed atop Rhaegal. Drogon crouched beside them, awaiting her signal. Even as she settled into position, she felt Rhaegal's muscles twitch beneath her. The memory of that last ambush lingered in both their minds. She patted him as though to say, "We'll be ready this time." She glanced at Drogon, who was near enough for her to see the shift of his wings, the readiness in his monstrous frame. Then she squeezed her knees against Rhaegal's scales, leaning forward. "Sovs," she whispered. "Fly." The dragon's wings opened, catching the sharp sea wind. With a powerful leap, they took to the sky, leaving the black sand and swirling mist behind. Daenerys closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting the sensation of flight wash over her. Then she guided Rhaegal upward, climbing above the still-waking world, Drogon at her side. High above the ocean, she could see the line of her fleet forging ahead, pale sails catching the sunlight. Further north, the craggy spires of Dragonstone receded into the distance. And far, far to the west, a smudge of dark clouds signaled the moody weather that often drifted in from the sunset sea. The day seemed calm, a soft lull before a storm of her own making. Her plan was simple in its brutal clarity. Lure Euron Greyjoy's iron fleet into open water, let him think he might pick off her ships, then descend upon him from above with both dragons. She would strike with fire until all the warships, all the scorpions, were naught but burning husks afloat in the waves. If Euron turned back or tried to hide behind King's Landing's defenses, Yara Greyjoy would appear from the west with her own ships, forcing Euron's hand. Surrounded and outmatched, the Iron Fleet would fall. Then and only then would Daenerys shift her gaze to the city. She thought of King's Landing, of its labyrinthine streets filled with innocent people. She thought of the great September that once stood there, now a scorched ruin courtesy of Cersei's cruelty. She thought of the Red Keep, the place that had once been her family's seat of power before the Baratheons and Lannisters dethroned them. It would be hers again, and she told herself she would take it without turning the city to ash. As midday neared, her fleet signaled colored flags and a distinctive horn blast. Euron's forces had been spotted on the horizon. The Unsullied manned the deck ballistae with stern efficiency. The Dothraki, uneasy at sea, fidgeted with their weapons. Daenerys, suspended high above, watched the approach of the Iron Fleet. She counted the ships, 20, 30, even more. Euron had gathered a formidable force. A hawk-like screech to her right alerted her that Drogon was drawing closer. Rhaegal responded with a deep growl. Daenerys felt a pang of trepidation for them both. She had to be cunning. Euron might have placed scorpions in cunning spots across each deck, carefully hidden. The last time, he'd sprung them on her unexpectedly. She guided Rhaegal upward, out of range, letting the men on the Iron Fleet see her silhouette, the dragon's wings cutting across the sun. Intimidation had its uses. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline lacing her every breath. Despite her wariness, she felt that flicker of Targaryen pride, the knowledge that she controlled fire-breathing gods above a mortal sea. Down below, the Iron Fleet adjusted formation. Dark sails shifted, and she spotted at least a dozen large scorpions bristling along the decks. Euron's men scurried to align them, taking aim. Her own ships began to fan out, a carefully orchestrated maneuver to draw the Iron Fleet away from the coastline. She watched as Yara's ships emerged in the distance from the west, swiftly closing any avenue of retreat for Euron. The horns blew again. Now was the time. The Iron Fleet, pinned between two threats, began to scatter. Some turned starboard to face Yara's ships, others angled port to meet Daenerys's. Euron's flagship lurked near the center, a monstrous vessel with the Kraken sigil fluttering black and gold. She suspected Euron himself would be there, shouting orders in that mad way of his. Daenerys urged Rhaegal lower, though still out of immediate scorpion range, flame building in his belly. Drogon followed, his larger form a looming shadow. At her silent command, the dragons bellowed in unison, a thunderous challenge that carried over the waves. The men below scurried to their stations, adjusting the scorpion's angles. But Daenerys angled Rhaegal to the right, circling wide, while Drogon soared to the left. They would force the ballista operators to split their attention, preventing a concentrated volley. Just as she anticipated, half the scorpions pivoted to Drogon, half to Rhaegal. Bolts launched skyward with whistling shrieks, but at the range Daenerys maintained, she had time to bank and dodge. Rhaegal swooped gracefully, the near miss of a bolt sending a shiver through her. But he was agile and strong, and she angled him back to the center, unleashing a torrent of flame. The first warship she engulfed caught fire in seconds, the sail igniting, the wood crackling as men jumped overboard. Rhaegal roared, a triumphant sound. From the corner of her eye, Daenerys watched Drogon incinerate another ship, the scorpion operator flailing as flames consumed him. The Iron Fleet reeled, scorpions attempting to redraw aim. Euron's flagship, however, had not yet fired. Daenerys realized it was biding its time. If she flew in too close, that monstrous scorpion at the prow would find its moment. As if reading her thoughts, the prow swung toward her. She saw a glint of metal, the scorpion turning in her direction, a large bolt ready to loose. With a command and shift of her weight, she guided Regal into a steep dive, weaving between ships. Another volley of bolts soared overhead, some streaking wide. She felt the wind of one shot that came too close, grazing Regal's flank, but there was no piercing, no blood, just a near miss. Her heart hammered. She twisted back, Regal's wings beating furiously. With a savage roar, he bathed 2 more ships in flame, their hulls exploding in an inferno. Yara's fleet moved in then, ramming the panicked Iron Fleet from behind. Sails tangled, boards splintered, iron grapnels clamped down. Greyjoy battled Greyjoy in a clash of steel and curses. Daenerys soared higher, scanning for Euron's flagship again. Drogon had done his share of destruction, pillars of smoke marking the remains of 4 or 5 burning vessels. Already, the Iron Fleet was in disarray, many vessels listing or sinking. She spotted Euron's ship near the center, a battered but still formidable shape. The Scorpion at its prow reloaded, men working feverishly under Euron's bellowed commands. Regal's nostrils flared, picking up the tension. This was the moment. Daenerys urged him forward, focusing on that single war machine that had come so close to taking Regal's life once before. Another bolt screamed through the air, but she twisted Regal, diving at a sharp angle. The bolt missed by a hair. Then Regal unleashed fire at the flagship's deck. Flames licked at the wood, sailors fled or were consumed. The ballista operators scrambled, cursing, reeling back. Daenerys seized the opportunity, she guided Regal closer, another surge of flame aimed at the Scorpion. She could almost sense Regal's anger, that primal vendetta, as the green dragon's flames erupted in a rolling wave that immolated the Scorpion, chewing through steel. Euron stood at the helm, she recognized the swaggering silhouette. He looked up at her, face twisted in fury, and hurled something in her direction. A spear? She couldn't tell. It fell uselessly short into the ocean below. The prow of the ship crackled beneath the heat of dragon flame, the Scorpion now a blazing ruin. Euron, clothes singed, retreated to the stern, though it hardly mattered. The ship was a funeral pyre. His men jumped overboard. In one last mad act, Euron roared something incoherent at the sky. Daenerys hovered just out of range, the beating of Regal's wings stirring the smoke and cinders. She watched Euron's flagship burn, the deck giving way. Gouts of flame danced around the Kraken sigil. As the mast toppled, Euron's figure disappeared into the billowing smoke and the tilting deck. Whether he drowned or burned mattered little. The Reaver's threat was over. She signaled Drogon with a shrill whistle, his dark shape joined them in the sky, circling the remains of the Iron Fleet. The once fearsome armada was broken. Half-sunken hulks smoldered. Surviving ships had surrendered to Yara or tried to flee, though few would succeed. Some men bobbed in the water, clinging to wreckage, lost and defeated. It was done. The Iron Fleet was no longer a threat. Daenerys allowed herself a single moment of release. Regal lived. Her plan had worked. She stroked his scales, leaning in to murmur, soves, again, instructing him to rise above the carnage. She would not chase those who had jumped into the sea. Let them swim to shore or drown as the Seven willed. The threat of scorpions on the water was ended. Below, Yara's men finished off the last pockets of resistance. Daenerys noted with satisfaction that her own fleet had sustained losses, but far fewer than if they had sailed blindly into Blackwater Bay. She had taken the battle to Euron and emerged victorious. Now no one would threaten Regal from these seas. She glanced toward King's Landing in the distance, the red roofs and high walls perched near the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, the towers that might still hold hidden scorpions. But without the Iron Fleet dominating the bay, she could choose her approach. She would not be forced into a choke point with ballistae on every side. There was still risk, but it was immeasurably diminished. Her forces regrouped. The next few hours were spent securing the area, assisting Yara with capturing or destroying the last of Euron's ships. Tyrion made landfall on a small, rocky coast near the mouth of the bay where he began to coordinate supplies. And Daenerys waited, perched high on Regal's back, scanning the horizon, ensuring no hidden threat lurked. When she finally landed Regal on a broad stretch of coastline, the sun was dipping low. Smoke rose in the east, blackening the sky, the last funeral pyres of the Iron Fleet. Men in battered armor rushed about, cheering or moaning over injuries. Daenerys dismounted carefully, her legs aching from hours astride her dragon. Grey Worm approached with a crisp salute. "Your Grace," he said, his voice the calm monotone she had come to rely on. "We have captured at least 6 of Euron's ships intact. Yara Greyjoy has claimed them for her cause." Of Euron's men are prisoners, others fled. She gave a nod. Good. Treat the captives with firmness but not cruelty. We are not here to butcher the defeated. Grey Worm nodded, though his eyes flickered with an edge of hardness. The death of Missandei still weighed heavily on him. Daenerys reminded herself that she too was scarred by that loss. But she wanted to be a different sort of ruler. She remembered Ser Barristan's tales of her brother Rhaegar, how he had been beloved for his gentle spirit as well as his skill in battle. She wanted people to speak well of her too, not cower in terror. Tyrion limped over, his face stained with soot. "A resounding victory," he breathed, though he looked as though he could barely believe it. "For the moment, we hold the bay. Now we must turn our eyes to Cersei. She'll know by now that her fleet has fallen. She'll be preparing her city for siege." Daenerys met his gaze. "No more ambushes," she said. "I want to take King's Landing with minimal loss of life. I want to avoid indiscriminate slaughter." Even as she spoke, the image of the Red Keep flashed in her mind. She recalled how close she'd come to losing Rhaegal, to letting anger drive her into a reckless assault. She couldn't let that happen now. "That will be difficult," Tyrion said, rubbing his beard. "Cersei's scorpions are likely set all along the walls. The Golden Company stands ready, presumably in front of the city gates. And she has her people to hide behind." Daenerys felt a bitter taste in her mouth. Cersei would use the innocent as a shield. She had shown no hesitation before. If she's placed scorpions along the walls, we'll need to dismantle them. "I will not risk losing Rhaegal or Drogon." Varys emerged from a cluster of Unsullied, gliding forward like a pale ghost. His voice emerged soft as cobwebs. "If I may, your grace, there is talk in the city that many resent Cersei's rule. The common folk remain terrified. The question is, do they fear you more?" Daenerys stifled a flare of irritation. "I intend to show them they need not fear me if they do not stand in my way. We'll distribute food to any who surrender. But if the Golden Company stands with Cersei, we will fight." Grey Worm gave an approving tilt of his head. Tyrion and Varys exchanged looks. Daenerys felt the friction between them like a live wire, an undercurrent of worry. They feared her potential for madness or cruelty. She understood that, and it stung. But she also knew she had to be strong or lose everything. That night, the army made camp on the beach. Daenerys walked among her troops, speaking words of encouragement, praising their bravery. The Dothraki offered her spits of roasted fish, half-charred, the best they could manage in this unfamiliar place. The Unsullied sat in quiet ranks, cleaning their weapons with methodical care. The tension of another looming battle sat heavy on all. The dragons roost on a jutting cliff, silhouettes stark against the moonlit sky. She eventually found her way to the water's edge, drawn by the soft hush of the waves. She stared out over the dark expanse of the bay. Small fires flickered on the wrecks in the distance, casting ghostly lights on the water. Footsteps approached behind her. She turned and found Jon Snow. He wore plain leathers, dusted with salt and sand. The sign of the Stark Wolf was visible on his chest. His face held that steady calm she recognized, though sorrow lingered in his eyes. The losses in the north weighed on him as well. He had led men through the horror of the dead. The living war might be simpler in a twisted way, but no less deadly. He paused a few steps away, letting the sound of the surf fill the silence. "You did well today," he said at last, voice low. "Destroying the Iron Fleet without losing any dragons." Daenerys folded her arms. "I couldn't bear to lose Rhaegal. It would have broken me." She hated admitting such vulnerability, but with him she allowed a glimpse of it. Jon gave a small nod. "He's named for my father," he said quietly. "I'm glad he survived." There was no envy in his tone, just relief. They stood together a moment, the wind tangling their hair. Daenerys remembered that the truth had been laid bare between them. Jon's real name, Aegon Targaryen, threatened everything. Yet he had pledged he did not want the throne. She believed him, at least in part. Still, the revelation cast a silent gulf between them, an uncertainty about how others might react if they knew. Jon cleared his throat. "I know you're set on taking King's Landing. I only ask that if there is a chance, a real chance, to spare the innocent, we take it. I've seen what happens when power is used to destroy indiscriminately. We battled the Night King, but this is a different sort of darkness. I don't want to see children burned in the streets." Daenerys swallowed. The ghost of her father's legacy haunted her. "I promise," she said, though her voice trembled with the weight of it, "I will not burn the city for no reason. If they stand against us with scorpions, if they try to kill my people, I will respond. But I do not desire to slaughter the innocent." Jon accepted her words with a slow nod. "Thank you." She hesitated, wanting to reach for his hand, but uncertain if they still had that closeness. In the end, the moment passed. She turned back to the waves. As the breeze carried the tang of salt and the faint crackle of distant fires, they stood side by side, both inheritors of House Targaryen's legacy, both determined that it would not lead them to madness. Morning came with a crimson sunrise over the sea. Scouts reported that King's Landing had gone on high alert. Cersei had stationed archers along the walls, and the Golden Company had formed ranks outside the gates, while additional scorpions were positioned at strategic points. The city was bracing for an attack. Daenerys gathered her council near the remnants of the battered coast. Tyrion unrolled another map of King's Landing, placing small carved figures to represent scorpion placements. "We can approach from multiple angles," he said, preventing them from focusing all their ballista fire on a single spot. Grey Worm leaned over the map, expression cool. "The Unsullied can advance in a tight formation to break the Golden Company lines. Our spears can outrange them. The Dothraki can flank. The scorpions worry me," Daenerys said, her jaw tense. "Even with 2 dragons, we can't just rush in. We have to neutralize them." Tyrion tapped the miniature scorpion piece. "Cersei likely has them on various towers and ramparts. If you approach from directly above, she may still be able to swivel them upward. The range might be limited, but it's enough to be dangerous if you hover too low." "Then I won't hover," Daenerys said, voice firm. "I'll keep Drogon high. Rhaegal will fly at range, attacking from the sides when necessary. The rest must be done by our ground forces. We'll wear down the Golden Company, break them. And if the city's defenders see the battle turning, perhaps they'll open the gates rather than let us burn them." Jon Snow, who had listened quietly, nodded. "If I lead a force around the walls, come in from the western side, we might find less scorpion coverage. We'll draw some of their fire, giving you the chance to strike those positions from behind." Daenerys studied him. She trusted his skill in battle, but worry lanced through her. The Golden Company was well-trained, disciplined, and had strong cavalry. If something went wrong, she risked losing a good portion of her men. Yet it was a sound strategy. If the defenders scrambled to face multiple threats, they would weaken. Then Daenerys could strike with the dragons. Tyrion sighed. "I should remind everyone that a direct assault on a city can lead to enormous bloodshed. Is there no diplomatic option? Perhaps Qyburn, Qyburn is a creature of Cersei's," Daenerys snapped. "He's not a man of reason. Missandei is dead because of them. They executed her in cold blood." Her voice broke slightly, but she steadied herself. "No, Tyrion, we can't negotiate with that monster." Varys interjected, voice a cautious hush. "Then we proceed, but we must keep the city from collapsing into chaos. The people need to see you as a liberator, not just another tyrant." Daenerys lifted her chin. "I will do what must be done." So they planned through the morning, dividing the army into 3 forces. Jon would lead one force around the western walls, Tyrion and Grey Worm would direct the main assault at the city gates, and Daenerys would coordinate dragon strikes from above, carefully targeting scorpions. Rhaegal and Drogon would never linger in range. They would swoop in, unleash fire, and withdraw. Once the gates were breached and the Golden Company faltered, they hoped the city might surrender swiftly. That afternoon, the allied host marched. The Unsullied, ranks of disciplined men, moved with eerie silence under their spears. The Dothraki rode with a more chaotic energy, whooping war cries when they glimpsed the city's distant spires. The northern forces who had joined Jon maintained a steady formation behind him, grim-faced. The battered survivors of the long night had pledged themselves once more, hoping this would be the final war. From atop Rhaegal, Daenerys watched the columns of troops stretch along the coast. Beyond them, King's Landing rose, the tall walls formidable, the Red Keep looming on its hill. She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, excitement, fear, determination. Once, she had daydreamed of simply flying over these walls and taking her throne. Reality had proven far more complicated. They approached within sight of the city by late afternoon, setting up a forward position behind a series of grassy ridges. Tents were pitched, supply wagons drawn up. Daenerys conferred with Grey Worm one last time, verifying the timing of the assault at dawn the next day. Tyrion insisted that the men rest, for a city assault demanded fresh legs and minds. That evening, Daenerys took Rhaegal for a short flight around the perimeter, scanning for any hidden placements of scorpions. She spotted a few suspicious lumps along the outer bastions. The Golden Company's standards flapped in the breeze, neat lines of cells words bracing for the assault. She saw their cavalry out front, shining armor forming a wall of steel. She wondered how many had faced dragons before, likely none. Cersei's red banners hung over the gates. Daenerys tried to peer into the city, but the walls were too high. She imagined the thousands of citizens sheltering in their homes. She prayed they would remain indoors when the fighting began, that they would not become collateral damage. That night was sleepless. Daenerys paced in her tent, hearing the distant crackle of torches and the rustle of men stirring in their bedrolls. Rhaegal's low rumble of breath occasionally shook the ground outside where he dozed. At intervals, someone came to her with updates. No new movement from the enemy, no sign of a sally or sabotage. All was quiet and uneasy calm. Her thoughts drifted to the past, Meereen, Astapor, Ukai, cities she had taken from tyrants and slavers. She had seen how swiftly a grateful populace could turn if they were not fed, if justice was not delivered quickly. She vowed that if she took King's Landing, she would feed these people, protect them. She would rule better than Cersei, no matter the cost. Dawn arrived in a swirl of cold mist. The rising sun glinted off the golden helms of the Golden Company formed outside the city gates. Their leader, Harry Strickland, sat astride a warhorse, posture straight as though defying the entire Targaryen host. Daenerys summoned Rhaegal, feeling his powerful muscles shift beneath her. Drogon, guided by no one but fiercely protective of his mother, soared overhead, an omen of destruction. Jon's force began their flanking maneuver, banners snapping in the morning wind. The main host advanced upon the gates, unsullied in disciplined ranks, Dothraki scattered on the wings. Daenerys let the tension build, waiting for the first sign of scorpion fire. She guided Rhaegal in a wide arc, staying high, scanning for movement on the walls. There a glimmer of steel. Scorpions! She saw men adjusting the massive crossbows. She gritted her teeth. If she flew too low, they would aim for her. So she circled, signaled Grey Worm to begin the assault. Horns blared. The Unsullied advanced. Almost immediately, the Golden Company archers loosed volleys of arrows. Some of the Unsullied raised shields, formed testudo-like formations. The Dothraki circled, letting fly with their curved bows. Daenerys hovered, watching, waiting for the scorpions to reveal their lines of fire. Once she knew where they were, she could strike. Down on the field, the Golden Company cavalry charged forward, crashing into the Unsullied front. Spears and swords clashed in a cacophony of metal. The Dothraki let out furious war cries, launching themselves into the fray. Dust rose, screams mingled with the thudding of hooves. From her vantage, Daenerys saw the Golden Company had discipline, but the Unsullied's unbreakable formation and the Dothraki's ferocity began to push them back. Scorpion bolts soared suddenly, aimed not just at her but at the front lines where they could tear through ranks of infantry. One bolt skewered a row of Unsullied, then another crashed into the ground. Daenerys felt Rhaegal tense beneath her. She made a decision. Dracarys, she commanded, guiding Rhaegal into a dive toward the nearest scorpion position. The operator, startled, scrambled to reload, but Rhaegal's flame engulfed the wall, setting the siege engine ablaze. Screams rang out as men fled the inferno. A second scorpion crew on a nearby tower pivoted, launching a bolt. She yanked Rhaegal to the side. The bolt ripped past them, so close that she felt the rush of wind. She unleashed fire again. The tower collapsed in a roar of flame, debris clattering down the side of the wall. Below, Grey Worm led a contingent of Unsullied in a push that broke the center of the Golden Company's line. Their commander, seeing the unstoppable tide of disciplined spear and shield, gave ground. The Dothraki streamed in, cutting down Sel's-wards. A few scorpions along the walls tried to fire at the ground forces, but their aim was limited. Meanwhile, Drogon circled from the opposite side of the city, letting loose a rolling wave of flame on more scorpions. Each engine destroyed was one less threat to Rhaegal. Daenerys' heart pounded with the realization that this plan was working. By focusing on scorpions systematically, she preserved her dragons. The Golden Company's left flank collapsed, their cavalry driven back by the savage Dothraki assault. Strickland tried to rally, but the Unsullied surge was relentless. She saw him in the chaos, shouting and waving his sword, but the tide of battle had turned. Suddenly, a corner of the city wall erupted in motion as the gates creaked open. Not in surrender, but in a surge of Lannister loyalists. Daenerys tensed, expecting a wave of fresh troops. Instead, a small group of city guards and crossbowmen spilled out, forming a ragged line behind the Golden Company. Arrows whistled, striking down the Dothraki on the edges. Daenerys guided Rhaegal around, planning another pass of fire, but scorpions deeper in the city tried to target her. She soared higher, evading a flurry of bolts. One battered scorpion near the gate fired, and she watched in horror as the shot, wild and unsteady, plunged into the ground near her men. She gritted her teeth, forcing the recollection of how Rhaegal had been hurt last time. She would not let that happen again. Jon's force now reached the western walls, clashing with Lannister soldiers stationed there. Daenerys spotted pockets of fierce fighting, but it looked as though the defenders were spread too thin, uncertain how to stop so many converging assaults. The The city had not prepared for a land-based pincer with overwhelming numbers. Strickland, cornered, tried to wheel his horse, but Grey Worm hurled a spear that struck the man clean in the chest. Blood spurted. The commander toppled, and the Golden Company's front lines, already in disarray, collapsed in panic. Many dropped their weapons, calling for quarter. Daenerys, controlling Regal, let out a breath. This was it, the moment. The cell's words were beaten. She saw Unsullied rounding up prisoners, forcing them to their knees. The city gates stood partially open, the path inside the walls unguarded. If she pressed now, the Red Keep would be vulnerable. Yet she remembered her promise. She would not lay waste if they were ready to surrender. She flew closer, scanning the gate. Civilians cowered behind carts. Soldiers in battered Lannister armor either lay dead or knelt, tossing their swords aside. Grey Worm and the Unsullied advanced in disciplined ranks, forming a perimeter while the Dothraki whooped in victory or chased down retreating guards. Slowly, she guided Regal to land near the shattered gates, the huge dragon folding his wings. Plumes of smoke rose where the scorpions had burned. Ash drifted in the air, the acrid scent of battle thick in Daenerys' nostrils. She dismounted, feet hitting bloodied ground. Her heart thundered. This moment was everything she had worked for. Grey Worm approached, spear in hand, face flecked with blood. They have no leader now. The Golden Company yields. Daenerys nodded, scanning the kneeling cell's words, men once famed for their unwavering loyalty to coin. Secure them. Offer them the choice to join me or remain prisoners. She then lifted her gaze to the city. Cersei was somewhere inside, perched in the Red Keep, no doubt furious, no doubt planning one last stand. Tyrion emerged from behind a line of Unsullied, breathless, hair disheveled. Your Grace, the city is faltering. The gates are open. If you press on, you might take the Red Keep by nightfall. Jon arrived moments later, sword in hand, equally winded. We overcame the Western garrison. They're surrendering. He studied Daenerys' face, searching for her intentions. She glanced at the columns of black-armored Unsullied, the swaths of Dothraki riders. Smoke curled from parts of the wall. Civilians peered out from behind shuttered windows. A hush fell over the battlefield, broken only by the moans of the dying. Daenerys spoke, voice resonant. We will move into the city, but we will not harm those who do not resist. Break down every scorpion you find. If any remain loyal to Cersei and raise arms against us, we put them down. The rest will live. Jon breathed out a small sigh of relief. Tyrion nodded, face solemn. They advanced carefully through the gates. The stench of fear permeated the cramped streets just inside the walls, but no organized defense appeared. Lannister soldiers had either fled, deserted, or been cut down. Daenerys mounted Regal again, albeit with caution. She soared above the rooftops, scanning for hidden scorpions. A few popped shots at her, but Drogon, patrolling the opposite side of the city, quickly burned the perpetrators. She and Jon, with Grey Worm's disciplined presence on the ground, advanced toward the Red Keep. Civilians screamed and scattered, though Daenerys' men did not pursue them. She gave orders to let them hide to avoid random slaughter. The city felt suffocating with tension. Smoke from the earlier scorpion fires drifted overhead. But as more word spread that the Targaryen queen did not intend to kill indiscriminately, some began to flee or simply kneel. Finally, Daenerys reached the broad courtyard outside the Red Keep. Towers of red tone stretched upward. The drawbridge was raised, the gates barred. A handful of Lannister soldiers stood at the battlements, crossbows aimed. Daenerys landed Regal some distance away at the far edge of the courtyard, with Grey Worm and the Unsullied forming a line behind her. She could see women and children in the windows, trembling. One crossbowman loosed a bolt and it struck the ground near her feet. Grey Worm tensed, but Daenerys held a hand up. You have lost, she called in a ringing voice. Lay down your arms and you will live. The soldiers looked at each other. A second bolt was fired, clattering off Regal's scales without harm. The green dragon hissed, jaws parted in warning. Daenerys felt the heat building in his throat, but she held him back. Suddenly, a figure in red and gold armor stepped forward. The gates opened slightly, and a rush of Lannister soldiers poured out, weapons raised in a desperate final stand. Grey Worm's front line braced. Daenerys let out a frustrated, sorrowful breath. These men were throwing their lives away. She gave the command and the Unsullied advanced. The clash was short and brutal. The Lannister forces, demoralized and outnumbered, buckled quickly. Grey Worm cut down their commander. One or two tried to retreat, but the Unsullied pinned them. Soon, the courtyard was littered with corpses. Daenerys dismounted, stepping gingerly among the fallen, her heart pained by the waste. Jon arrived with more men, forming a perimeter. Tyrion stood behind them, mouth set in a grim line. All eyes turned to the massive doors leading into the Red Keep. "Cersei is inside," Tyrion said. "She won't surrender." Daenerys motioned to Rhaegal. "Stand back," she told her men. Then, with a determined grimace, she guided Rhaegal to unleash a precise burst of flame, blasting the doors. Wood and iron crumpled under the dragon fire, the heat shimmering. The path into the Red Keep was open. Without hesitation, Daenerys stepped forward, Grey Worm flanking her, Rhaegal snarling behind. The entrance hall stretched before them, scorched and filled with drifting ash. Her heart pounded. This was it, the seat of her ancestors. She passed the battered Lannister sigil that hung on the wall, thinking how her family's three-headed dragon once adorned these halls. A handful of Queen's Guard knights tried to bar her path, but Grey Worm dispatched them with swift precision. Corridor by corridor, chamber by chamber, Daenerys advanced deeper into the keep. She remembered the stories Viserys had told her as a child of the secret passages, the hidden chambers. But she had no guide other than Tyrion's knowledge of the castle's layout. Eventually, they arrived at the throne room doors. The faint light of late afternoon streamed through the tall windows. Daenerys pushed open the doors. Inside, she saw the Iron Throne perched on its dais, the swords fused by dragonfire centuries ago. And before it, in a swirl of red velvet and gold filigree, stood Cersei Lannister. A hush fell over the chamber. Cersei held herself with regal bearing, though her hair was slightly disheveled and her eyes were rimmed with desperation. The Mountain stood by her side, a towering figure of undead brutality. Qyburn hovered near the throne, trembling. A handful of Lannister guards formed a shaky circle around their queen. Daenerys lifted her chin, meeting Cersei's gaze. She saw hatred there, defiance. "It's over," Daenerys said, her voice echoing in the hall. "Your Iron Fleet is destroyed. The Golden Company has surrendered or been annihilated. Your city is in my hands." Cersei's lips curved into a small, bitter smile. "So, you've won. Congratulations, Daenerys Targaryen. The realm is yours." Qyburn took a hesitant step. "My queen." Cersei silenced him with a gesture. Her eyes flicked over Daenerys' shoulder to Grey Worm, then to Jon Snow, who had entered behind them. She recognized him, no doubt recalling the man who had parleyed with her once. Then her gaze returned to Daenerys. "Go on then," Cersei said, voice trembling with suppressed fury. "Burn me alive in my own throne room. Prove to the realm that you were just like your father." Daenerys' anger flared, but she kept her voice steady. "I am not my father." She took a step forward. "You killed my friends, used your people as shields, and refused every chance at peace. You have brought this upon yourself. Surrender now, and I'll consider a more merciful end than the one you gave Missandei." Cersei's expression flickered at the mention of Missandei's name. For a moment, she almost looked regretful, perhaps not for the act, but for her defeat. Then the brittle defiance returned. She glanced at the Mountain, her final guard dog. "Gregor," she said softly, "if they advance further." The Mountain raised his monstrous sword. Grey Worm and Jon tensed, but Daenerys spoke first. "We outnumber you 100 to 1. You've lost. Command your knight to stand down. Your reign is finished." Cersei looked around, her eyes darting to the toppled pillars, the wide entry behind Daenerys filled with Unsullied. There was no escape. Her face twisted into something savage, a cornered lion. She gave a trembling laugh. "Very well," she said. "But I promise you this, the people of King's Landing will never love you. And your friend," she spat the word, "the one you lost, will only be the first in a long line." Daenerys' jaw tightened. She turned to Jon, and with a quiet nod, he stepped forward. The Lannister guards dropped their weapons, seeing the futility. Only the Mountain stood unyielding. Qyburn frantically tugged at his arm, urging him to obey, but the brute did not move until Cersei gave a curt jerk of her head. The Mountain stood down, though calling that monstrous stillness, standing down felt incorrect. Grey Worm approached with manacles. Cersei drew back, eyes flashing, but there was no triumph left in her. She extended her wrists, letting Grey Worm clap the irons on. In that moment, Daenerys felt a mix of pity and grim satisfaction. The mighty Cersei Lannister, undone by her refusal to bend, a captive in her own castle. The throne room was silent. Daenerys stood near the Iron Throne, the seat of her forebears. She remembered her vision in the House of the Undying, a crumbled throne room, the roof broken, snow drifting in. Now here she was, the Red Keep still intact, though battered, and outside it was not snow but ash that fell. Yet the seat was within her reach. Slowly, she ascended the steps, letting her fingers graze the cold metal of those fused blades. The desire to seat herself upon it, to claim her birthright, surged in her chest. She let out a trembling breath. She was so close now, just a single step. But she turned back to face the room, her voice resonating. Bring her to the dungeons. Let her stand trial for her crimes. Then the realm will see that I am not here to be judge, jury, and executioner in the dark. She'll face the justice of a queen who does not hide behind torture and cruelty. Cersei let out a half-choked laugh of disbelief, but she said nothing. Jon and Grey Worm led her away, with Tyrion and Varys observing in stunned silence. Daenerys remained behind, standing by the Iron Throne she had sought for so long, alone in the vast chamber, listening to the distant cries of the city outside. She had dreamed of this moment, yet it felt hollow with the memory of the war, the fallen, and the knowledge of all that still needed to be rebuilt. Rhaegal let out a distant roar from beyond the throne room's broken doors, as though calling her name. Daenerys ran a hand along the throne's edge, feeling the sharp points of the swords that had built it. This seat had been forged by the fires of her ancestors' dragon. It was only fitting she stood here now, triumphant because she had used her dragons wisely, avoided the reckless ambush that once nearly cost Rhaegal's life. That decision had changed everything. She stepped away, letting the moment pass without sitting. There would be time enough to claim her seat once the realm was secure, once the people saw that she would not be another tyrant. She walked out of the throne room, down the corridor, and emerged into the courtyard where the sun angled low in the sky, bathing the destruction in golden light. Soldiers moved among the wounded, some offering water to the frightened civilians. She heard the sobs of widows, the cries of orphaned children. War always left scars. She thought of the day she had tried to free slaves in Astapor, the heavy toll it took. This day was no different, for all the battles, all the claims to destiny. Jon stood near a broken column, speaking quietly with Tyrion. He caught sight of Daenerys and stepped away. "It's over," he said, voice heavy with the cost of it all. "The city is yours." She nodded. "And I mean to keep it. But we must help these people heal. We must mend what we've broken." Tyrion's smile was sad, but genuine. "That will earn you more loyalty than 1,000 swords." In the distance, Drogon circled overhead, black wings beating. Rhaegal perched on a scorched tower, letting out a low rumble. Daenerys watched them with an ache of gratitude. Both were alive, both with her. She remembered the day she had nearly lost Rhaegal to Euron's scorpion bolts. How close she had come to repeating that mistake at King's Landing. Instead, she had destroyed the Iron Fleet first, ensuring her child's survival. Her journey was not done. She still had to rule, to prove herself worthy of the crown she had fought so hard to gain. She had to calm the realm, to bring stability after so many years of Lannister rule, after so many years of war. She had to show that she was not the Mad King's daughter in spirit, even if she was by blood. Rhaegal's survival felt like a sign, a second chance to do things right. In the following days, the city settled under occupation. The Scorpions were dismantled. Cersei remained imprisoned, awaiting trial. Some called for her immediate execution, but Daenerys refused. She wanted a public reckoning, for the realm to witness justice done openly. Tyrion worked tirelessly to restore order, ensuring that bread was distributed among the frightened populace, instructing that no house be looted or burned without cause. Grey Worm enforced discipline among the unsullied, punishing those who gave in to violence or pillaging. Rhaegal and Drogon roost on the battlements of the Red Keep, a visible symbol of Targaryen power. Yet Daenerys made it clear that they would not burn the city. Gradually, some of the citizens dared to come out. They saw the dragons, recognized the potential for destruction, but also saw that the Queen did not unleash their fury without reason. Slowly, a sort of uneasy acceptance grew. Daenerys walked through the streets at times, accompanied by loyal guards. People gazed at her with fear and curiosity. She saw hunger in their eyes. She directed the distribution of food, opened the granaries. Jon Snow joined her in these efforts, his presence calming some who recognized him as a northerner who had fought for the living. Their progress was slow, but it was progress nonetheless. One afternoon, Daenerys stood upon the battlements with Tyrion, looking out over the city rooftops. Far below, a group of laborers repaired a battered tower, while street vendors began setting up makeshift stalls again. The faint hum of life returning to normal drifted on the breeze. "We did it," Tyrion said softly, voice tempered by the costs. "You have the throne, and Regal is safe." Daenerys folded her arms. She watched Regal swoop across the sky, chasing a flock of pigeons above the city. He let out a roar, triumphant, as if tasting the free air unburdened by scorpion bolts. Then he perched on a distant rooftop, letting out a few playful puffs of flame as pigeons scattered. "It could have gone differently," she murmured, "but we learned, we adapted, and I will not forget those who died to give us this chance." Tyrion lowered his head. "We shall mourn them." She turned, meeting his gaze. "You are Hand of the Queen. It is time to help me build a realm of lasting peace. We will hold Cersei's trial soon. The lords and ladies of Westeros will see that I can rule with justice as well as power." Tyrion's eyes shone with cautious optimism. "I will do my best." So it was that Daenerys Targaryen claimed King's Landing, with Drogon and Regal at her side. By destroying the Iron Fleet first, she had shielded her children from the scorpion bolts that had nearly taken Regal's life. With both dragons still alive, her presence in the capital was formidable, yet she strove to temper that power with mercy. The city lay battered but not burned to the ground. People whispered that the Dragon Queen might prove more merciful than her lineage suggested. Days turned into weeks. Repairs commenced. Food convoys arrived from the Reach, secured by Daenerys's newly minted alliances. She held councils, inviting local merchants and farmers to voice their grievances. Tyrion guided policy, ensuring taxes were fairer, that resources were distributed in ways that would not starve the populace. It was an uphill battle, but Daenerys had endured too many storms to falter now. Whenever she needed solace, she would climb onto Regal's back, flying high above the city's sprawl. From that vantage, she could see King's Landing's every scar and promise. Regal's strong wings kept them aloft, a symbol that, despite the darkness of war, hope had survived. She always recalled the near-fatal wound Euron scorpions had dealt him at Dragonstone, and how she had vowed never to let that happen again. One evening, she dismounted in the courtyard after a short flight, Regal huffing in contentment. Jon Snow stood there, arms folded, watching. He met her gaze with a quiet smile. "He looks strong," he observed. She patted Regal's neck. "He's healing well. He'll bear that scar, but it doesn't stop him from flying." Jon's eyes flicked to Daenerys's face. "Scars don't have to define us," he said, almost as if speaking of himself. "But they remind us of what we've overcome." A warmth spread in Daenerys's chest. She thought of the scars she carried, of losing Ser Jorah, of Missandei's last word, of nearly losing Regal. Those wounds shaped her, but they also gave her a sharper empathy. She realized she needed to ensure the realm did not see her as a conqueror alone. Day by day, she took those steps. She pardoned minor criminals who had been coerced by Cersei to fight. She ensured the city's orphans found shelter in the keep, distributing bread. She invited the faith of the Seven to help in the healing of the wounded, forging a cautious partnership. Word spread. The tension did not vanish overnight. She was still the queen who had laid siege to the city, whose dragons had burned men. But the stories of her restraint also echoed, stories of how she offered mercy to those who surrendered. At last, the day of Cersei's trial arrived. Lords from across the realm, some loyal, some uncertain, trickled in to witness. The throne room was cleared of debris, the windows thrown open to let in the daylight. Cersei, shackled and pale, was led forth by unsullied guards. The Mountain was nowhere to be seen. He had met his end in a final confrontation with Sandor Clegane, or so rumor claimed. Daenerys sat upon the Iron Throne for the first time in a public ceremony, clad in regal black and red. Tyrion stood at her right hand, Jon at her left. Grey Worm flanked the dais. The crowd of lords and ladies murmured, the tension palpable. Cersei stood in chains, her posture slumped. Gone was the proud queen who had once sat on this throne. Her eyes flickered with contempt, but there was a resigned emptiness in her expression. The charges were read out: murder, treason, conspiracy, countless acts of cruelty. Proof was presented, witness testimonies recounted. Tyrion himself spoke of Cersei's betrayal at the Dragon Pit, her refusal to aid against the White Walkers. Varys enumerated the cunning manipulations that led to the beheading of Missandei and the attempted ambush at Dragonstone. When asked if she had anything to say, Cersei lifted her chin. "It's ironic, isn't it?" she said. "We're all killers here. I simply did what I had to do. If I had your dragons, I'd have burned you all long ago." The court stiffened, but Daenerys refused to be baited. "You show no remorse," she said. "So be it." She paused, scanning the watchers, nobles, soldiers, small folk representatives. She wanted them to see that this was justice, not a savage execution. Cersei Lannister is found guilty of treason and murder. By law and custom, the sentence is death. But I will show the realm that we are not our fathers. We will not hide cruelty behind locked doors or whispered secrets. Her execution will be swift. A hush fell. A few men in the crowd flinched. Some, those who hated Cersei, appeared satisfied. Others looked uneasy, as though half expecting Daenerys to burn her alive with dragon fire. But Daenerys rose from the throne. "Take her to the courtyard," she said. "Let the realm see what becomes of tyrants. Then let us turn the page." Grey Worm led Cersei away, flanked by Unsullied. Daenerys followed, the throng of spectators behind her. They emerged into the vast courtyard where the public could gather. Commoners lined the edges, some silent, some jeering, but all watching. High on a balcony, Rhaegal perched, observing. Drogon waited on another parapet, tail twitching. Cersei was made to kneel. Daenerys stepped forward with a long, curved Valyrian steel sword. She did not wish to drag this out with cruelty. She looked into Cersei's eyes. In them, she saw fear but also a flicker of defiance. She remembered what it was like to watch Missandei's last moment. It had been a final cruelty. She would give no such performance now. With a single, clean stroke, Daenerys took Cersei Lannister's head. Blood darkened the stone. The crowd gasped. It was finished. The last Lannister queen was gone. A silence settled, broken only by the cawing of distant crows. Daenerys lifted her head, her voice carrying. "The war is over. May the realm know peace." From the balcony, Rhaegal roared, a long, echoing cry that rumbled across King's Landing. Daenerys felt it resonate in her bones, a lament for all that had been lost and a call to what could be built anew. She turned to the crowd, some of whom were kneeling, others simply staring. "I will not abandon you," she declared. "We will rebuild your homes, feed your children. I have destroyed the tyrant who placed herself above you. I mean to be your queen, and I will do so with justice, not fear." For a heartbeat, there was no response. Then a few in the crowd began to cheer, a cautious, uncertain sound. Others simply looked on, weary but perhaps relieved that the fighting was over. Daenerys saw a flicker of possibility in those eyes, a chance to earn their trust. She walked away from the body, away from the hushed crowd, making her way toward the battered steps that led back into the Red Keep. Jon Snow followed silently, an unreadable expression on his face. Tyrion lingered behind, ensuring order, while Grey Worm barked commands to keep the peace. When Daenerys reached the keep's entrance, she paused. Rhaegal swooped down from the balcony, landing in the courtyard behind her. He let out a low rumble, pressing his snout gently to her hand. She stroked his scales, remembering how close she had come to losing him. The thought twisted her heart. But they were both here. They had made it. She looked up at the broken towers, the ravaged city, and realized this was only the first step. Winning a THR. One was easy compared to ruling compassionately, healing a war-torn land. Yet she possessed 2 living dragons, the unwavering loyalty of the Unsullied, the fearsome skill of the Dothraki, and allies who believed in her promise. She had endured heartbreak, betrayal, and the near death of her beloved Rhaegal. She would endure whatever challenges came next. In the months that followed, Daenerys devoted herself to the restoration of King's Landing. She oversaw a structured relief effort, awarding titles to those who aided in rebuilding. Tyrion worked day and night to quell dissent among the remaining Lannister loyalists, forging alliances with those who preferred peace over further bloodshed. Jon served as an intermediary between the North and the Crown, ensuring that trade routes reopened. Grey Worm led the Unsullied with a disciplined hand, punishing crime but refraining from needless cruelty. Gradually, life returned to the city. Merchants set up stalls, blacksmiths hammered metal for reconstruction, and stonemasons repaired collapsed buildings. A new sense of cautious optimism took hold. People began to whisper that the Dragon Queen might indeed be different from the Mad King. Some still mistrusted her, but fewer than before. Rhaegal and Drogon became an awe-inspiring sight overhead, but they no longer terrorized the populace. One evening, Daenerys climbed the Red Keep's battlements alone. She found Rhaegal perched on a tall turret, gazing toward the horizon. The setting sun cast a warm glow over his emerald scales. She approached, placing a hand on his flank. "We've done so much," she murmured. "But there's still more." The dragon gave a soft rumble, leaning gently into her touch. She smiled, resting her forehead against him. She thought of how precariously close she'd come to losing him when the Iron Fleet ambushed them at Dragonstone. Her eyes closed, and she recalled the crack of the bolt, the blood in the sky. She could still feel the memory in her bones, the terror. But that was the past. She had learned from it, adapted her strategy, and destroyed the Iron Fleet before it could destroy her. The consequences of that choice echoed through every moment that followed. Regal still lived, and she had taken King's Landing with less violence than she otherwise might have. She had not unleashed Drogon's fury in a blind rage. The city still stood. She opened her eyes, gazing out at the city she now ruled. Shimmering rooftops stretched in every direction, the battered walls under repair, the river gate shining in the evening light. Beyond that, farmland and rolling hills. The realm she hoped to unite and protect. For a long time she stood there, Regal's warm breath washing over her in the cooling air. She whispered, "If only those we lost could see this." Yora, Missandei, her Khal Drogo, so many years passed. She wondered if somewhere they approved. She wondered if this was truly her destiny or if she was simply forging it step by step. In either case, she would carry on. The Targaryen words were fire and blood. But she had learned that fire could also be a source of light, and blood a bond of loyalty rather than mindless slaughter. Night descended. Stars flickered over the city. Daenerys finally stepped back, letting Regal settle. She gazed toward the sky and allowed herself a small smile. Tomorrow there would be more tasks, more governance, more decisions that would shape the realm's future. But for tonight, she took comfort in knowing that she and Regal had both survived the crucible. She whispered a soft Dracarys into the wind, not as a command to burn, but as a reminder of who she was. She was Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, the unburnt breaker of chains, and a mother of dragons who had chosen to strike first where it mattered most, saving her child. Regal's continued presence at her side was a symbol of what she could accomplish when reason and resolve guided her, rather than rage alone. And so the flames that once threatened to consume everything were harnessed instead for renewal. The Iron Fleet was gone. King's Landing had surrendered, and Regal yet soared. The next chapters of her reign would be written with the quill of justice, or so she hoped, ensuring that the city and the dragons could share the sky in peace. The first night after Cersei Lannister's trial, Daenerys Targaryen did not dream of thrones or crowns. She dreamed instead of the sky. In her dream, she flew on Regal's back, high above King's Landing, and the sky was an ever-shifting mosaic of bruised purple and gold. Drogon soared beside them, roaring with an exultant fury that no longer felt dangerous, only proud. Beneath them lay the city, seemingly at peace, its rooftops unbroken by scorpions, its people breathing freely. In the dream, she did not feel anger or fear. She felt the promise of something better, something she had long yearned for. Then dawn came, glowing soft around her in the dream world, and she woke in her chambers in the Red Keep, her mind light for a rare, fleeting moment before reality's weight settled back on her. She was queen now, and King's Landing was hers in name. Yet the city was fractured by war and mistrust, and the rest of Westeros hardly bowed as one. She had come so far from the days of beggary in Pentos, from braving the Red Waste, from freeing slaves in Astapor. Yet this was, in some ways, her most precarious moment. Establishing a stable realm demanded more than an inspiring vision. It demanded choices that would echo for generations. She rose, donned a dark robe trimmed with subtle red thread, and went to the windows. The vantage from her chambers overlooked the Blackwater Bay, where once the Iron Fleet had ruled. Now, those waters were relatively still, patrolled only by her own ships, some from her original host, others taken from the remnants of Euron's defeated navy. The memory of Regal's near death returned to her like a phantom ache in the chest. If she closed her eyes, she could still see the monstrous bolt that had torn at his flesh. But he lived, she reminded herself, and that changed everything. The morning air was cool as she left her room and descended into the halls. No longer were these corridors lined with Lannister guards, nor did the dead mountain lurk in every shadow. Instead, Unsullied stood at strategic points, disciplined and silent. Here and there, Dothraki visited or wandered, uneasy in the labyrinth of stone. Some of the keep's servants went about their duties with cautious curiosity, bowing low when Daenerys passed. She offered them faint smiles. She did not want them to feel threatened, but after so many years of Cersei's rule, their fear would not vanish overnight. She made her way to the throne room, stepping beneath the tall archway. Light streamed in from narrow, high-set windows. The floor here had been scrubbed clean of the blood spilled during Cersei's sentencing. Repairs continued on some of the columns damaged during the final assault. At the far end, the Iron Throne stood, still black and jagged, an uneasy seat made of 1,000 swords. She had occupied it only briefly to pass judgment on Cersei, and then left it behind. Tyrion Lannister entered from a side door, carrying a leather-bound ledger. He bowed to her with a wry half-smile. "You're up early, Your Grace." "Too many thoughts," she admitted, stepping closer so they could speak quietly. "And you?" He patted the ledger. "I've been reviewing the state of the city finances. Not as terrible as we feared. It seems Cersei was storing quite a bit of gold in the vaults below, though the crown is still in debt to the Iron Bank. They have not yet declared their position on your reign, but we can't ignore them." Daenerys raised her chin. "We will come to terms with the Iron Bank. I have no desire to spark another conflict, but will not be beholden to them at every turn, either. I trust you to handle negotiations as needed." She glanced around. "How many lords remain in the city?" "Most of the lords who came to witness the trial have lingered. Some are fearful, uncertain if you might declare wholesale vengeance on old families. Others genuinely wish to make peace, or at least gauge the wind. Houses from the Reach, the Stormlands, even some from the Riverlands and the Vale." She reflected on that, lips pursed. When she had first arrived in Westeros, she had believed her rightful claim alone would inspire them to rally around her. But so many alliances here had been built on convenience or fear. She would have to prove her worth to lead, to unify. "Let them linger," she said. "I'll meet with each in turn. If they have concerns, I want to address them openly. I promise them justice, not tyranny." Tyrion inclined his head, relief in his eyes. "A wise choice." He paused, flipping open his ledger. "There's another matter. The dungeons hold a fair number of captured Lannister soldiers and a handful from the Iron Fleet. I suggest we formalize their status. Some might join the City Watch or pledge fealty in exchange for freedom. Others may need trial or punishment." Daenerys let out a slow breath. "Yes, arrange it." She brushed a strand of silver-gold hair behind her ear. "We must also see to the orphans left by this war. I've seen them on the streets, fending for themselves." Tyrion's face softened. "I'll dispatch men to bring them to the keep. We can house them here temporarily, or open a portion of the city's closed temples for refuge." She gave a nod. The conversation was practical, measured. This was the daily grind of being a monarch, not the romantic swirl of banners and dragonfire. She knew she would tire of endless details, but she also recognized that ignoring details was how tyrants sowed chaos. The realm deserved better. They parted ways, and Daenerys exited the throne room to find Jon Snow waiting in the corridor. He wore the simple leathers and furs that marked him as of the North, though he no longer carried the same aura of isolation. He had been among the first to treat with her, to call her my queen. Though their relationship was complicated by blood and secrets, he inclined his head in a brief greeting. "You're meeting with the small council?" he asked. She fell in beside him as they walked. "Yes, Tyrion is ensuring the city's finances remain stable." "How fare your northern men?" he considered, wary. "Some want to return home, saying the war is done. Others have little left in the north. They might settle here or continue south. We should address them soon, give them direction." "They followed you into battle," Daenerys said. "We can't simply set them adrift." She recalled how the northern banners had swelled her ranks, how they fought at Winterfell and survived the long night. They deserved her gratitude. They continued through a side hall that opened onto a balcony. Warm morning light spilled across the stone. Daenerys paused there, gazing down into the courtyard below. Hundreds of men and women bustled about. Unsullied on patrol, Dothraki tending their horses, blacksmiths hammering at makeshift anvils. In the corners, small folk lined up for rations. Jon leaned on the balustrade, silent. From beyond the walls, the faint caw of seabirds drifted on the wind. Daenerys said, "The realm has so many scars. I can't fix them all at once." Jon's expression was somber, but his gaze was kind. "One step at a time. That's how we survived the undead. Together." She glanced at him, remembering how he had rallied forces at the Battle of Winterfell, how he had faced the impossible. A part of her still loved him, though the revelation of his true name, Aegon Targaryen, had strained them. Their romance had cooled into an uncertain closeness. Even so, she felt the warm edge of trust between them. "Yes," she said softly. "Together." They moved on, descending a spiral staircase that led toward the keep's lower halls. As they passed, servants and guards bowed or averted their gazes. Daenerys felt a pang. How many of these people had lived under Cersei's rule, seeing only fear and cruelty from the monarchy? She wanted to show a different face. That too would take time. In a modestly furnished chamber that Daenerys had designated as a council room, she found Varys pacing, Grey Worm standing at attention, and Missandei's old seat conspicuously empty. A pang of grief twisted in Daenerys's chest at the sight. Missandei had always been there to greet her with a graceful bow and a kind word. That vacancy was more than an empty chair, it was a wound that could not truly heal. She settled at the head of the table, Jon sitting to her left, Tyrion to her right. Varys stepped forward, hands clasped. "Your Grace," he began in that soft, measured voice, "I've received missives from several lords across Westeros. Some welcome your reign, others are cautious. Lord Glover in the north remains aloof, uncertain if your presence in King's Landing truly benefits the north. The Vale's regent, Lord Royce, expresses guarded support. The Riverlands appear divided, with some loyal to Edmure Tully, who in turn is open to you. The Reach is ours through the alliance with House Tyrell, well, the remnants of House Tyrell. Currently, it's under stewardship of new, lesser lords endorsed by you." Daenerys folded her hands. "Are any actively hostile? Or does Dorne stand against me?" Varys shook his head. "Dorne is still ruled by the young prince of House Martell, who lost much under the Lannisters. He signaled a desire for peace, possibly an alliance sealed by a marriage or a treaty. The Iron Islands are in Yara's hands, and she owes you loyalty after you helped her avenge her brother by defeating Euron. The Westerlands are uncertain, it was formerly Cersei's stronghold. Many Lannister bannermen resent your conquest, though they're leaderless without Cersei or Jaime. Some might rally around Kevin Lannister's branch or one of the lesser cousins." Tyrion exhaled, drumming his fingers. "There's a possibility they'll bend the knee if we offer them stable rule and a place in the new order. They have no wish to be singled out for retribution, but it will require delicate handling." Grey Worm kept his silence, though Daenerys saw the tension in his posture. He had lost so much, his love, Missandei, cut down at Cersei's command. Now the war was done, and he found himself in an alien land, asked to enforce laws among people who barely understood him. She wanted to lessen his burden if she could. Daenerys scanned the faces around the table. "We'll begin by hosting these lords, forging treaties. Promise them that the taxes I collect will be used to rebuild roads and ports, to revitalize the farmland devastated by war. We can't rely on fear alone, they must see a benefit in my rule." Varys bowed his head. "I'll send out ravens at once. Will you consider the Dornish marriage proposal? They might push for something official." Jon stiffened slightly, but Daenerys sighed. "Let us not speak of marriage alliances yet. I've my own considerations in that matter. We can open talks of trade and mutual defense first. If the Dornish prince insists on a betrothal, we'll see." She felt an old irritation rising at the notion that her throne might be conditional on wedding alliances. She had outgrown that game, or so she believed. They moved on to other business, how to address bread shortages, how to handle the freedmen from Essos who'd come to Westeros in her wake, and how to reorganize the City Watch now that so many of its captains had sided with Cersei. The conversation was long, draining. Through it all, Daenerys remained poised, making decisions as swiftly as she could, trusting Tyrion and Varys to fill in gaps in her knowledge. Jon contributed his perspective on northern attitudes. Grey Worm's input was quieter, focusing on security matters. At last, the meeting wound down. Each left with tasks to carry out, leaving Daenerys alone near the table. She rose, crossing to the window. The midday sun shone harsh, revealing the Red Keep's battered walls, the city's damaged silhouette. Beyond, she glimpsed the faint shape of her dragons circling overhead. Drogon's black wings were easy to spot, while Rhaegal's green blended more readily with the shimmering haze. A memory of Rhaegal's cry when he was wounded flickered through her mind. She let out a slow breath. They were safe now. When she turned away from the window, she found Tyrion had lingered, his posture tentative. "Yes," she said gently. He cleared his throat, stepping closer. "Your Grace, if I may speak plainly. The city is calmer. You've instituted fairer measures than many expected. But there is still uncertainty about your intentions. You command dragons, an army of unsullied and Dothraki. People fear that if they displease you, you might burn the city. I know you don't intend that, but fear is stubborn." Daenerys pressed her lips together. "I know. My father's memory casts a long shadow, and Cersei's last stand convinced many that Targaryens are dangerous. But I have to prove them wrong through actions, not just words." He nodded, the lines in his face softening. "I only wish to remind you of the importance of winning hearts. You destroyed the Iron Fleet before it could kill Rhaegal. That showed foresight, not reckless rage. You must show the same caution in how you handle rule. If you can demonstrate restraint and justice, I believe the city will learn to trust you." She listened, bristling slightly. She was aware of all these points, but she saw the concern in Tyrion's expression. He had watched her nearly succumb to grief and fury once. He was afraid for her, or perhaps for the realm. With a tired but earnest smile, she nodded. "Thank you for your counsel, Lord Tyrion. I will heed it." He bowed, then left. Alone, she thought about the steps she needed to take, about the slow process of forging a new identity for the Targaryen monarchy. She could recall her time in Meereen, how she had tried to rule justly, to break the slave economy and establish a free society. It had been difficult, marked by betrayals and unrest. But she had made progress eventually. Perhaps she could do so again. She decided to walk the city without ceremony, summoning a pair of Unsullied for protection, more to discourage thieves than to intimidate anyone. She ventured out of the keep's gates, across the courtyard, and through the large main gates. Citizens recognized her silver-gold hair and parted nervously, some kneeling, others averting their eyes. She tried to offer small nods of acknowledgement, encouraging them to go about their business. A child stared at her with wide eyes, then clung to her mother's skirts. The mother gave Daenerys a trembling curtsy, and she continued on. The city smelled of soot, horse manure, and the faint tang of sea air. Stalls sold fish, vegetables from the crownlands, and bread that was occasionally half-burnt. The economic strain was plain. Many goods were in short supply. Daenerys took in the sight of boarded-up shops, houses with scorched rooftops. Some small folk recognized unsullied spears and made way anxiously. She came upon a small group of orphans gathered near a broken fountain. Their clothes were tattered, and they looked at her with a mixture of awe and apprehension. She knelt, ignoring the protests of her unsullied guards, and asked them where their parents were. "Dead or gone," was the hollow response from one older girl. Daenerys felt a bitter sadness. These were the fruits of war, children forced to survive alone. She resolved then and there to expand the keep's kitchens to feed them daily. She promised them help, though she knew promises alone might mean little until proven. As she rose to continue, she heard muttering from a cluster of onlookers. They were suspicious, uncertain if her presence was genuine or some sort of show. Some asked if the Targaryen queen would soon start burning rebellious neighborhoods. She forced herself not to react with anger. People had lived under Cersei's tyranny, then endured a siege. They needed time. She walked on, noticing that each step through King's Landing was a step among ghosts. Buildings once important to the Targaryens had been repurposed or destroyed across centuries of rebellion. The Great September, once the center of faith, had been demolished by Cersei's wildfire. In its place stood rubble. Daenerys stood before the wreckage for a long time, mindful that religious zeal had shaped the city's culture. She wondered how she would replace or rebuild it. The faith of the Seven still held tremendous influence. Could she support them in constructing a new September? Or would it only stir more conflict? Eventually, the sun slid lower in the sky. She returned to the Red Keep, body-weary from the day's walk. Jon Snow awaited her in the courtyard, intercepting her with a quiet expression. "You walk the city alone?" he asked, voice carefully neutral. "Not alone," she said, gesturing to her unsullied guard. but I needed to see it as it is, not from a dragon's back. He nodded. And? What did you think? That we have a long road, she answered softly. But I'm determined to walk it. He seemed satisfied with that response, and they fell into step together as they entered the keep. Servants lit torches in the corridors, warding off the dusk. Jon cleared his throat. I received a raven from Sansa. She congratulates you on taking King's Landing, but she still has concerns about northern independence. Daenerys' stomach tightened. She doesn't think I'll keep my promise that the North can remain free if it so chooses? I recall you once told me the North wanted to rule itself. Jon rubbed his jaw, looking pensive. She wants confirmation in writing, an official document that acknowledges the North's sovereignty. Many Northerners died in the war against the dead, and they feel they've sacrificed enough. They want no more southern entanglements. Daenerys halted in the corridor. Torchlight flickered on the walls. She recalled the vow she'd once considered making to let the North rule itself if that was what it wished. But at the time, she had assumed she'd have to unify all 7 kingdoms. The notion of a separate North felt like fracturing her domain. Could she truly afford that now? A part of her wanted to keep the North in the fold, another part recognized the cost of forcing them to kneel. War could erupt again. She recalled Missandei's advice from days long gone that sometimes a queen must compromise to spare her people's blood. If I let the North secede, will others do the same? She asked, frustration creeping into her tone. Jon's lips thinned. Possibly. Or possibly they'll see you as more benevolent. The choice is yours, Daenerys. I cannot speak for Sansa on this any further. I'm caught in the middle. She studied his face. She sensed he truly did not want the throne for himself, that he only wished to ensure the North's well-being. The conflict in him was plain. At length she spoke. I'll consider it, but I can't promise an immediate decision. For now, let Sansa know I'm not ignoring her request. He agreed, though she saw a flash of relief in his eyes. Maybe he had feared she would rage or respond with threats. Once again, she reminded herself that she must rule with caution, not anger. Rhaegal was alive because she had not let blind fury lead her into ambushes. The same principle applied now. They parted ways. Daenerys made her way to the large outer balcony that overlooked the city and bay. The sky was awash of pink and orange as the sun sank. Dothraki riders trotted in the courtyard below, exchanging jokes in their guttural tongue. She spotted Tyrion engaged in conversation with a red-haired woman, likely a lady from the Riverlands or the Vale. A sense of weary responsibility overcame her. Then a sudden roar cut through the air. She turned to see Drogon soaring over the keep, a dark shape against the molten sky. Rhaegal followed close behind, wings beating steadily. The sight stirred something fierce yet comforting in Daenerys' heart. They were her children, living proof that the impossible could be made real. The memory of losing Viserion during the war against the dead never stopped haunting her, but seeing Rhaegal alive was a reminder that she had learned from tragedy. She descended into the yard as the dragons came to rest on the ramparts. Their presence still frightened many, but the unsullied Dothraki no longer scrambled in panic. People had grown used to the winged silhouettes overhead. Daenerys approached Rhaegal carefully, placing a hand upon his warm flank. His golden eyes regarded her with a patient intelligence. He lowered his head, letting her stroke the ridge of his neck. A voice spoke behind her. I'll never get used to that. She turned to find Davos Seaworth, who had arrived a day earlier with shipments of grain from the Stormlands. He was a loyal advisor to the late Stannis and later an ally to Jon. Daenerys found him honest, if weary from a lifetime of wars. She allowed a faint smile. They are wonders, aren't they? But to me, they are also family. She continued rubbing Rhaegal's scales, feeling the slow rumble of his breath. Davos squinted up at the dragon. I lost a son once in battle, as you may know. Hardly the same, but I sympathize with the lengths a parent might go to protect a child. Daenerys closed her eyes briefly. She recalled the panic she'd felt as Rhaegal spiraled over the sea, blood trailing from his hide. I nearly lost Rhaegal to Euron Greyjoy's scorpions. If I had been more reckless that day, all might have been lost. She exhaled, turning away from the memory. But we're here now. Davos nodded. Aye. And the next challenges may be less violent, but no less difficult. Ruling is a form of war in its own right. Daenerys' lips curved in a bittersweet smile. I'm discovering that. Davos took his leave, heading to see Tyrion about supply logistics. Daenerys lingered with Rhaegal a while longer, then withdrew to her chambers to wash and prepare for supper with a coterie of visiting lords. In the grand dining hall, once the seat of lavish feasts under the Targaryens, then the Lannisters, she played hostess to several figures of note. Lord Royce from the Vale, stern-faced and blunt in manner. Lady Beesbury, a minor but wealthy noble from the Reach. Lord Grafton of Gulltown, who came on behalf of maritime trade. Jon Snow sat at her left, silent but watchful. Tyrion presided over the flow of wine and conversation, expertly defusing potential tensions. They spoke of harvest yields and trade routes, of road repairs and bandit troubles in the Riverlands. Daenerys listened keenly, occasionally interjecting with questions about their needs. She offered the Queen's purse to help rebuild roads. She promised to dispatch some of her Unsullied to clear out roving outlaws. Her guests seemed cautiously impressed. None said it outright, but their posture suggested that their worst fears of a savage Mad Queen, raining fire, had not come to pass. Instead, they encountered a measured, if formidable, ruler. Yet she also noted that they watched her dragons warily, especially after hearing Rhaegal's distant roar. For them, the dragons were an uneasy symbol, a threat that could turn on them if they misstepped. Daenerys understood that fear might never fully fade, but she hoped to temper it with proof of her fairness. After the meal, some lingered for polite conversation. Lord Grafton approached Daenerys, bowing low. "Your Grace, if I might speak of shipping tariffs? Gulltown has always been a major port, and we can supply fresh fish and grains if the taxes are adjusted to account for new shipping lanes." She gave him her attention, listening to the complexities of balancing maritime trade. Tyrion chimed in with details of the crown's financial needs. She tried not to let her mind wander. Ruling was more than wielding power. It was this: negotiation, compromise, the shaping of policies so that the realm as a whole benefited. Eventually, the crowd dispersed. She found herself in the corridor with Jon, who carried a pensive expression. "You handled them well," he said. She shrugged, weary. "I am still learning. In Essos, I freed slaves with direct action, break the chains, topple the masters. Here, the chains are subtler: debts, alliances, grudges. We must untangle them carefully." Jon looked at her with sympathy, as though recalling how swiftly she had once acted in Yunkai and Meereen. "At least your dragons are safe. You have time to handle these matters without the threat of a hidden scorpion behind every mast." She nodded. "Yes. Rhaegal's presence reminds me that I must be patient. One misstep and everything can unravel." They parted for the night. Daenerys returned to her chambers alone with her thoughts. She sat at a small writing desk, penning responses to ravens from the north, the Riverlands, and the Westerlands. She tried to frame each letter with a tone of reason and cooperation. The hours slipped by. When she finally laid down to rest, the moon was high. Her dreams were filled with images of the Iron Fleet burning at sea, the tower scorpions reduced to cinders. She saw Rhaegal's green wings beating against a stormy sky, turning aside a hail of deadly bolts. She awoke with her heart pounding, a mixture of relief and dread. No matter what she did, ghosts of war lingered. The days passed in a rhythm of administration and rebuilding. Daenerys called more councils, assigned new city watch captains, and funded public works. Her allies established a semblance of order, patrolling the streets, rooting out pockets of criminals who preyed on the vulnerable. A measure of uneasy calm settled over King's Landing. She issued a royal decree that no further scorpions be constructed within the city, save for smaller anti-siege devices for standard defense. She insisted that the secrets of scorpion technology remain under watch by her loyal engineers to prevent a repeat of Euron Greyjoy's cunning. Some grumbled about the Queen banning weapons that could threaten her dragons, but she refused to compromise. Those ballistae had nearly killed Rhaegal once. Some lords from the Westerlands traveled to see her, hoping to negotiate favorable terms for their region. Tyrion, himself a Lannister, spoke on their behalf, bridging the gap. Daenerys was careful not to penalize them for Cersei's crimes. She demanded that they recognize her sovereignty, contribute fair taxes, and refrain from sheltering any remnants of the Lannister loyalists who might still wish to undermine the new regime. In exchange, she promised investment in their mines and roads. Reluctantly, they agreed. Bit by bit, the realm inched toward stability. There were moments of friction. Some members of the Dothraki Khalasar grew restless without active war to occupy them. More than once, Daenerys had to remind them, through the authority of her Bloodriders and Grey Worm's firm presence, that pillaging was not allowed here. She negotiated a solution by promising them they could race their horses outside the city walls, staging small contests of skill. She set aside some land near the Rose Road for them to roam. A precarious peace formed. Meanwhile, the Unsullied adapted to life as a standing army of peacekeepers, though some yearned for new purpose. Grey Worm, stoic as ever, enforced discipline. Daenerys noticed a lingering sadness in his eyes. He had lost Missandei, and no measure of victory would restore her. She sympathized but knew he would not speak of it. Instead, he channeled his grief into protecting the queen they both had loved. Outside King's Landing, farmers returned to their fields. The scars of the siege slowly healed. Jon Snow occasionally led patrols to the Stormlands to address bandit threats. And each time he returned, Daenerys was reminded of how deeply he cared for the safety of ordinary people. He never sought glory, only solutions. She found solace in that, though their personal connection remained fraught. They rarely spoke of his true parentage. The knowledge lingered like a shadow between them. One evening, after a tense day of negotiations with Dornish envoys, Daenerys retreated to the top of the Red Keep's highest tower. The wind was brisk, carrying the scent of the sea. From here, she could see the entire city and the bay beyond. Distant lanterns glowed among the streets, scattered like stars on earth. The hush of night enveloped her. She heard the heavy wing beats before she saw the shape in the sky. Drogon descended onto a nearby battlement with a rush of air. He folded his wings, growling softly in greeting. Rhaegal soared behind him, but the green dragon chose to perch farther down, on a stable tower. Daenerys watched them for a moment, a deep affection stirring in her chest. She walked to Drogon, ran a hand over his obsidian scales. He let out a low rumble. She could feel his power, the fire caged within. Yet he obeyed her commands, loyal as only a dragon could be to a Targaryen. Beside him, Rhaegal stirred, as if acknowledging her presence. The city, for all its lights and people, seemed tiny under the watchful gaze of these ancient creatures. Closing her eyes, she thought of the complicated path that had led here. She remembered freeing Rhaegal and Viserion from the vaults in Karth, after the warlocks had kidnapped them. She remembered the first time she mounted Drogon's back, fleeing the fighting pits of Meereen. She remembered watching Viserion fall to the Night King's spear, a heartbreak that still burned in her memory. She remembered Rhaegal almost dying by Euron's scorpion bolts. Each memory was a stepping stone of pain and triumph. Now she stood upon the highest tower of the Red Keep, a queen whose dragons survived. A part of her wondered if, had she chosen differently that day, flying blindly toward King's Landing, giving in to fury, she might have lost Rhaegal for good, and with him some vital piece of her soul. She opened her eyes. Night hung quiet and dark around her. The city below was battered, but slowly healing. She resolved that her rule would honor the sacrifices made. War could not be undone, but the future needn't be a reflection of the past. She placed a hand on Drogon's flank, feeling the slow, mighty draw of his breath. Then she turned, making her way down the tower steps, the swirl of torches illuminating the path. She passed a guard who bowed low. He recognized her expression, a mixture of contemplation and determination, and said nothing. She allowed herself a small nod in return. Step by step, corridor by corridor, she descended to her private chambers where a stack of messages awaited her. There was a summons from the Citadel, a note from the new Prince of Dorne, even a letter from Gendry Baratheon at Storm's End, expressing interest in forging an alliance. She set them aside for the next day. For now, she wanted a moment to breathe. In the morning, she met with Gendry Baratheon in the Solar. He was young, strong, and still somewhat awed by his status as a legitimized lord. She remembered how he had fought at Winterfell, forging dragon glass weapons, how he had aided them in defeating the dead. He approached her with a respectful bow. "Your Grace," he said in a firm voice, "I bring good tidings from the Stormlands. We've mostly quelled the bandits. The harvest will be decent, though some fields were trampled by leftover raiders." Daenerys listened, noting the sincerity in his voice. "I appreciate the report, Lord Gendry. The Stormlands have always been a vital region. I want to see them prosper." He nodded, shifting on his feet. "I was wondering if you might consider visiting Storm's End. The castle needs some repairs, and I'd welcome your advice. Your presence might help solidify trust. People there are uncertain what a Targaryen queen means for them." She considered. It was a fair point. Her travels in Westeros so far had mostly been war campaigns. A diplomatic visit could help, but was it safe to leave King's Landing with so many irons in the fire? She glanced at Tyrion, who stood behind Gendry, arms folded. Tyrion offered a small nod as if encouraging. "It could be beneficial, Your Grace. Show the Stormlands that their rightful queen is not an absentee ruler." Daenerys turned back to Gendry. "Very well. Once matters here in the city are stable, I'll come and see Storm's End." We can discuss fortifications and local governance." He broke into a relieved grin. "Thank you. I'll make the necessary preparations." She dismissed him with polite warmth. After he left, she sank into a chair, letting out a breath. Another item for her growing list of obligations. Yet she recalled how Stannis Baratheon had once claimed Storm's End was unconquerable. House Baratheon had always been a thorn in House Targaryen's side until Robert's rebellion ended Targaryen rule. Now, ironically, a Baratheon was looking to her as his rightful queen. In the afternoon, she received a messenger from the north carrying Sansa Stark's official plea for recognition of northern independence. The letter was carefully worded, praising Daenerys' efforts against the Night King and the retaking of King's Landing from Cersei, but it stood firm that the North desired to govern itself. The messenger bowed, awaiting her response. Daenerys dismissed him for the moment, needing time to think. She summoned Jon and Tyrion to discuss. They gathered in a quiet antechamber. Jon read over the letter, his brow furrowed. Tyrion paced, occasionally glancing at Daenerys. At last she spoke. "I don't want to spark new conflict, but if I allow the North to secede, I must be prepared that Dorne or the Iron Islands or others might follow suit. Soon we'll have not a single realm, but a patchwork of kingdoms again." Jon set the letter aside, voice low. "Is that so bad? The Targaryens forged the 7 kingdoms together, yes. But times change." Tyrion cleared his throat. "We must consider the practicalities. A fracturing realm could lead to border disputes. However, Your Grace, if you insist on holding the North by force or threat, you risk an unending rebellion. That also fosters chaos." Daenerys' gaze flicked between them. She felt an echo of frustration. She had believed that once she seized the throne, the realm would unite behind her as the rightful queen. Instead, a swirl of competing loyalties and regional identities remained. She thought of Rhaegal's near-fatal moment, of how she learned that being reckless or too proud could cost dearly. She folded her arms. Would the North truly keep to itself peacefully if granted independence? Or would it eventually be drawn into southern wars anyway? Jon answered quietly, "If the realm were threatened by an external force, we would stand with you as allies. But we prefer to govern ourselves in peace, without southern meddling or taxation." Daenerys closed her eyes, exhaling. She recalled how, during the War of the 5 Kings, countless Northerners died in battles far from their homes. She remembered the heartbreak that shaped them. Hadn't she claimed she wanted to break the wheel, this cycle of forced unity under oppression? She opened her eyes and looked at Jon. "And you, as a Targaryen by blood, do you still consider yourself a Stark in truth?" A flicker of pain crossed his face. "I was raised a Stark. I'll always be loyal to my family. I don't want your throne, nor do I want war." The sill. Stretched. Tyrion watched them both, tension in the lines of his mouth. Finally, Daenerys nodded, coming to a decision. "We'll sign a treaty with the North. They shall be recognized as an independent kingdom led by Sansa Stark. Their freedom from the Iron Throne's taxes will be formalized. In return, they'll maintain mutual defense pacts and open trade. Should the realm face a threat, we stand together. If we succeed in forging alliances with the other regions, they'll see that I am not here to crush them." Tyrion released a slow breath. This will be remembered as a remarkable concession. The first Targaryen monarch to see the North's independence in writing. Daenerys' gaze flicked to Jon. "You said times change. Then let them. My father tried to hold everything by fear, and it led to ruin. I would rather have an ally than a resentful subject." Jon inclined his head, gratitude and relief etched in his features. "Thank you." They worked out the details, specifying terms of trade, how the border between the North and the Riverlands would be managed, and what share the North might owe if a kingdom-wide project demanded resources. Daenerys insisted on a written oath from House Stark to come to the aid of the Iron Throne if an outside invader threatened. Jon agreed that Sansa would sign such a pledge. When the formal document was complete, Daenerys penned her signature with a flourish. Jon added his as a witness, along with Tyrion as Hand of the Queen. They sealed it with wax bearing the 3-headed dragon. Then Daenerys gave it to the messenger, instructing him to deliver it swiftly to Winterfell. After the messenger departed, Tyrion murmured, "This could be a defining moment in your reign. You've shown you are willing to grant freedom rather than impose it from above. News will spread quickly." Daenerys took a measured breath, feeling the gravity of the choice. "I hope it sets the tone for the future, that I don't rule by fear. For now, that's all I can do. Jon placed a hand over hers briefly, a rare gesture of closeness. Their eyes met and a subtle understanding passed between them. She had done something momentous and he recognized it. She gave a small nod, then pulled her hand away gently. The moment was fragile, too laden with history and possibility. Night fell across King's Landing once more. Daenerys walked the corridors in thoughtful silence. Outside, she heard the occasional roar of Rhaegal or Drogon patrolling the skies. There were times she still felt the pull to ride them at night, to see the city's lanterns from above and recall the freedom of flight. But her duties often kept her grounded. Perhaps that was the nature of being queen. She retreated to her solar, writing letters to various lords and ladies, detailing the new arrangement with the North. Already she imagined the questions. Would Dorne request the same? The Iron Islands had always yearned for independence. She braced for complicated discussions. Yet she felt that something in her had shifted from conquest to stewardship. Her earlier conquests in Essos had taught her that freeing people was not enough if you failed to help them build a sustainable future. Now, having secured the throne, she intended to do just that in Westeros. As the weeks bled into months, signs of recovery multiplied. Markets in King's Landing reopened, farmers from the Riverlands arrived with produce. Smiths hammered new swords from the scraps of old ones, forging plowshares, horseshoes, and building tools. The City Watch, reformed under a new commander loyal to Daenerys, patrolled the streets by day and night, cracking down on thieves and cutthroats. Tyrion reported that commerce with the Vale was rising as caravans traveled more safely now. Daenerys's court also grew. Lords and knights from across the realm trickled in, seeking to secure alliances or press personal claims. She listened to petitions about land disputes, lineage, and debts owed. Often she found the process tedious, but she also recognized its importance. This was how a monarch built a stable realm, through the resolution of endless small problems. Rhaegal and Drogon still perched on the Red Keep's towers, watchful guardians. She sometimes flew them over the city not as a threat but as a reminder of her presence. Many in King's Landing gradually grew accustomed to the sight of dragons overhead. Children even began to run after them in the streets, pointing and exclaiming in awe. One day, Daenerys smiled to see a group of small children wearing mock dragon wings fashioned from cloth. Through it all, Grey Worm remained a steady pillar, commanding the Unsullied with unwavering discipline. If Daenerys had to quell an uprising or a riot, his men did so swiftly. But those occasions became fewer as the city found a fragile peace. She asked Grey Worm what he envisioned for the Unsullied in the future. Did they wish to return to Essos or remain in Westeros? He said quietly that many would follow her anywhere, but some yearned for a life free of war. A difficult question with no immediate answer. Daenerys also prepared for her promised visit to Storm's End. She planned to travel by land with a modest escort. This would be her first official journey since taking King's Landing. The city was stable enough now that she could leave for a short time. Tyrion would remain as hand, overseeing daily matters, while Grey Worm commanded the garrison. Jon Snow agreed to accompany her partway, though he intended to return north soon after. He wanted to see how the North was faring under Sansa's independent governance. On the morning of departure, Daenerys stood by the gates of King's Landing, dressed in traveling leathers and a cloak. A light breeze ruffled her silver-gold hair as she oversaw the loading of supplies onto horses. Her retinue was not large, 20 Unsullied, a few Dothraki scouts, and a handful of advisors. In her belt she carried a small dagger of Valyrian steel. She glanced up at the sky where Rhaegal circled lazily. Drogon was perched atop the keep. She had decided not to bring both dragons on this journey, unsure of how that might be seen by the Stormlanders. Instead, she would ride Rhaegal, leaving Drogon in King's Landing as a protective presence. Tyrion approached, offering a half-bow. "All prepared, Your Grace. Gendry awaits you in Storm's End. He's quite eager to show you the castle's new repairs." Daenerys gave him a nod. "Keep everything running smoothly here. Should any crisis arise, send word and I'll return swiftly." He smiled wryly. "I'll do my best not to break your city in your absence." Jon appeared, leading his horse. "I'll ride with you as far as Storm's End," he reminded her. "After that, my road goes north." She met his gaze, feeling a pang. She respected his choice, but a part of her would miss him. So many times he had been a stabilizing presence. Even when they clashed, she valued his honesty. "Safe travels," then she said, politely formal. He nodded in acknowledgement. Daenerys turned, mounting Rhaegal with practiced ease. The dragon's scales glinted in the early sunlight. People in the courtyard, from guards to onlookers, paused to watch. This was no triumphant departure for war, but an official journey by their reigning queen. She inhaled, savoring the moment. She thought again of the day she had chosen to destroy the Iron Fleet first, safeguarding Regal from Scorpion fire. That choice had allowed her to be here now, astride him, forging a new future for Westeros. A choice born of caution and love, not blind rage. She guided Regal upward with a firm yet gentle command. The dragon spread his wings and pushed off the ground in a gust of wind. Her retinue on horseback began to move out through the city gates while she and Regal soared overhead, ensuring the route was clear. The city fell behind them. The wind whipped her cloak. She felt that old exhilaration, the rush of flight, tempered by the maturity that these recent months had forced upon her. Looking down, she saw the Rose Road stretching south. Fields of green shimmered under the sun, dotted by small villages. She dipped Regal lower to keep pace with her traveling party. People in the countryside gawked as the dragon passed overhead. Some fled indoors, others peered from behind wagons. Daenerys reminded herself that trust, especially in rural areas, would not come quickly. She tried to show no sign of aggression, letting Regal fly calmly. Jon rode at the head of the column below, glancing up occasionally. She gave him a wave, and he lifted a hand in return. The journey continued without incident for the first few days. They stayed overnight at minor holdfasts or camped under the stars when accommodations were sparse. She occasionally landed Regal to rest or hunt. The further south they traveled along the coast, the more she noticed old storm damage on the roads, reminders of the region's fierce weather. At last, Storm's End's imposing walls came into view, perched on a cliff overlooking a churning sea. The wind whipped waves against the rocks. Daenerys recalled the stories of Aegon the Conqueror besieging this fortress centuries ago. It had never fallen easily, even to dragons. But now Gendry Baratheon awaited her with an open gate. She circled overhead, Regal roaring a greeting that echoed off the ramparts. Down in the courtyard, she saw Gendry wave. Many of the castle's inhabitants pointed in awe, some stepping back nervously. The massive walls and distinctive drum towers of Storm's End testified to the Baratheon heritage, strong, unyielding. She guided Regal to land in a wide outer yard, the sea wind howling across the stone. As Daenerys dismounted, Gendry approached with a respectful bow. She could almost see Robert Baratheon's features in his face, though tempered by humility. "Welcome to Storm's End, Your Grace," he said, voice raised over the wind. "We're honored by your visit." She inclined her head. "Thank you, Lord Gendry. I trust all is well here." He gestured for her to follow. "Let's get out of this gale." They moved into the inner courtyard where the wind was less punishing. Jon Snow joined them, leading his horse. The rest of Daenerys's retinue filtered in. Unsullied formed a polite perimeter while stable hands hurried to see to the horses. Gendry led them into the great hall of Storm's End, a cavernous space with thick walls and high windows. Baratheon banners, recently made, hung from iron rods. Long tables were arranged for a feast. Daenerys was reminded of the meager supplies that once plagued her armies. Now, though, the hall smelled of roasting meat and fresh bread. Servants bustled about, lighting torches to chase away the gloom. They settled at the head table, Gendry offering warm welcomes. He introduced a few local knights, lesser lords, and stewards who helped him govern. Daenerys observed them, noting a mixture of curiosity and caution in their faces. She realized that many Stormlanders had only known Targaryens as ancient legends or rebellious foes. Her presence here felt strange to them. After the initial greetings, Gendry began a tour of the castle. They walked through stone corridors, wide enough for a small carriage. The walls were cunningly curved to deflect siege engines, a design said to be spelled against storms by ancient sorcery. Daenerys felt the cold sea wind in every hall, an ever-present reminder of nature's fury. She admired the fortress for its resilience. When they reached the ramparts, Gendry pointed out areas that needed repair. Some crenellations had collapsed in past storms, and one tower showed cracks in the foundation. "We lack the funds to rebuild swiftly," he admitted, running a hand over the rough stone. "But we're making do. I wanted you to see it firsthand so you understand the challenges we face." Daenerys studied the damage. "How large is your workforce? And your stone supply?" "Not large enough," Gendry said. "But with a royal loan or a reduction in taxes for a season, I could invest in these repairs, which would strengthen the Stormlands. And a strong Storm's End is a bulwark for the entire realm, especially if invaders ever come from the sea." Jon, standing beside them, nodded in agreement. The Stormlands have a long coastline, vulnerable to raiders if not well defended. Daenerys turned the idea over. She did not want to appear too generous in ways that drained the crown's purse. Yet Gendry's logic was sound. Storm's End was crucial strategically, and he was offering loyalty which was more than the Baratheons of old had done. She placed a hand on the weathered stone. "I'll arrange it. We can negotiate specifics with my hand. For now, consider your taxes reduced by half for the next year as long as that money is directed toward repairs. I'll send a few of my engineers to advise on reinforcing the walls. Storm's End will stand as a shield not just for the Stormlands, but for all Westeros. Gendry bowed in gratitude. Thank you, Your Grace. I'll make sure every coin is spent wisely. In that moment, Daenerys felt a ripple of pride. This was how to govern, forging relationships, strengthening the realm with mutual benefit. She recalled the destruction wrought by the Iron Fleet and how her victory there had opened the shipping lanes. Now, she was ensuring that Storm's End, too, would guard those waters from future threats. They returned inside where a small feast had been prepared in her honor. The meal began with thick stews, hearty bread, and fish fresh from the turbulent sea. The conversation was cordial. Gendry occasionally teased Jon, reminding him of the fellowship they shared during the war against the dead. Jon responded with a rare smile. He seemed more at ease here than he did in the halls of King's Landing. Daenerys found herself enjoying the atmosphere, a far cry from the tension in the capital. Storm's End was simpler, almost provincial, yet its warmth and directness appealed to her. She spoke with local knights about their families, with stewards about farmland. She assured them she was not here to impose punishing demands. Some seemed tentatively pleased. After the meal, Daenerys stepped outside for a moment, drawn by the roar of the sea. The sun had dipped low, staining the horizon a dusky orange. She strolled along the outer wall, feeling the wind whip strands of her hair. Far below, waves crashed against the rocks with a thunderous rhythm. She closed her eyes, letting the sea spray kiss her cheeks. Amid the salt air, her thoughts drifted to everything that had brought her to this moment. She was no longer a beggar queen in the Red Waste, no longer a liberator in Slaver's Bay, no longer the desperate conqueror at the gates of King's Landing. She was the Queen of Westeros, albeit a queen who had just recognized northern independence, and she walked the walls of Storm's End in peace. Rhaegal was alive, somewhere out there perched on the cliffs or hunting fish. Drogon remained in King's Landing, safeguarding her seat. The realm was stabilizing. In the hush of the evening, she felt the stirrings of genuine hope. Footsteps approached. She turned to see Jon Snow, cloak flapping behind him. He looked out over the sea, expression thoughtful. "It's beautiful," he admitted. "Like the north in its starkness, but different." She gave a soft hum of agreement. "Each region has its own harshness and beauty. King's Landing has its bustle, the north has its cold, and here, the storms rule." He nodded. They stood side by side a moment, listening to the crash of waves. Then Jon spoke in a low voice. "I wanted to thank you for letting the north go its own way. Sansa wrote to me she received your treaty. She's grateful even if she won't say it plainly." Daenerys' chest tightened. "I don't expect her gratitude. Only peace. That's enough." He studied her, eyes dark under the gathering twilight. "You've come so far from the woman I met. Then you demanded all 7 kingdoms bend the knee. Now you're forging something new." She reflected on that. "I had a choice, cling to the old vision of absolute rule or adapt to the reality before me. My father refused to adapt. It destroyed him. I refused to let that happen." He gave a nod, respect in his gaze. They watched the sea together. It was a quiet moment, unburdened by the secrets of their blood or the tragedies they'd faced. Just 2 people who had borne the weight of realms on their shoulders. A gull screamed overhead, riding the wind. At length, Jon said, "I'll be leaving for the north soon. There's still much to do at Winterfell, even if it's no longer part of your kingdom." Daenerys forced a small smile. "You'll always be welcome at my court, Jon, regardless of titles or allegiances." "Thank you." He looked as though he wanted to say more, but then only turned, heading back inside. She watched him go, feeling that familiar pang. Perhaps their paths would intertwine again, or perhaps they would continue diverging. She pushed aside the ache. She had a realm to rule and he had a home to protect. In the following days, Daenerys toured nearby towns with Gendry, listening to local complaints about storms ravaging farmland. She promised to dispatch engineers to help build windbreaks and drainage ditches. She authorized a small contingent of Unsullied to remain temporarily in the area, driving off any stray raiders. Each measure won cautious goodwill from the Stormlanders. At night, she slept in a modest chamber in Storm's End's inner keep. The walls vibrated with the roar of the sea, lulling her into strange dreams. She dreamt sometimes of a quiet life, away from the burden of crowns. But she always woke to realize that was impossible. Destiny had brought her here, and she would see it through. On the final day, she mounted Rhaegal in the courtyard. Gendry and his knights assembled to bid her farewell. "You've my thanks, your grace," Gendry said earnestly. House Baratheon stands with you. She inclined her head. You've done well for the Stormlands. Continue rebuilding, and you shall have my support. She turned Rhaegal's head, the dragon snorting steam in the morning chill. Jon, on horseback, offered her a parting nod. Safe flight, Daenerys. To you as well, she said. Their eyes met for a charged moment. Then she urged Rhaegal upward. The wind filled the dragon's wings, lifting them into the gray sky. The courtyard fell away beneath her. She saw the distant figure of Jon riding out as well, presumably to head north via roads and passes. In her chest, a swirl of emotions turned, but she pressed onward. She traveled back up the coast, shadows of clouds drifting over the sea. The flight was invigorating. Rhaegal roared once, as if savoring the open air. They occasionally landed to rest, always mindful of the realm below. When they passed over small villages, farmers gaped in awe, some kneeling in fields as she soared overhead. Perhaps they carried stories of the Targaryen queen and her green dragon. She hoped those stories would be less about fear and more about possibility. When she neared King's Landing on the final afternoon, she saw the familiar sprawl of rooftops and winding streets. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the walls glinted with new repairs. A sense of coming home filled her, even though she had grown up halfway across the world. This was her seat now. She circled once, scanning for signs of unrest. Instead, she observed a certain normality in the city's rhythms. Satisfied, she guided Rhaegal to the Red Keep's courtyard. She found Tyrion waiting below, shading his eyes to watch her descent. The impact of Rhaegal's landing stirred a swirl of dust. Daenerys slid off the dragon's side with practiced grack. Before she could speak, Tyrion bowed. "Welcome back, Your Grace. I trust Storm's End was instructive." She nodded. "It was. Lord Gendry has plans for repairs and we've pledged our support." Tyrion adjusted his tunic. "Excellent. Here, matters have been calm. No riots, no assassination attempts, no monstrous armies at our gates. I'd say it's been almost pleasant, if a bit dull." Daenerys gave him a faint smile. She turned to Rhaegal, murmured a soft word, and the dragon rumbled in response, taking flight to find a roost. Then she faced Tyrion again. "Any word from the north?" "The messenger arrived just this morning. Sansa Stark signed the treaty. The North is officially recognized as an independent kingdom. They'll maintain open trade and mutual defense." She even sent a polite note expressing hopes for continued friendship. Daenerys felt a wave of relief. "That is done then." Tyrion exhaled, nodding. "Yes. It seems your realm, or rather, your portion of the realm, stands on the brink of something better. Dorne has not requested independence yet. The Iron Islands remain loyal to Yara Greyjoy, who respects you. And the rest of Westeros, while not entirely united, is not in open rebellion. You've achieved something remarkable." Daenerys looked past him at the Red Keep rising over the courtyard. Workers labored on scaffolding, patching cracks, reinforcing walls. People bustled about with an energy that spoke not of despair, but of hope. She remembered the day she'd stood upon Dragonstone's shores, deciding to eradicate the Iron Fleet before it could harm her dragons again. That single choice had changed the war's trajectory, preserving Rhaegal, giving her the upper hand. Now, she saw a future in which dragons soared alongside a living, breathing kingdom that did not cower in terror. She said quietly, "It's only remarkable if it lasts. But we'll do everything in our power to make it so." She paused, then added, "I promise to break the wheel of tyranny. Perhaps this is how it begins, by showing that I can be both strong and merciful." Tyrion's mismatched eyes shone with cautious optimism. "Then let us continue that work. We still have a realm to rebuild." Daenerys walked with him into the Red Keep, the sunlight filtering through the great doors. She thought of the tasks ahead, formalizing alliances, rebuilding trust, ensuring her dragons remained an awe-inspiring presence rather than a terror to the people. The throne room awaited her, but she would not rush to sit upon the jagged seat. She had learned that true power was not in the sitting, but in the decisions she made each day, decisions guided by the desire to protect her people, human and dragon alike. She imagined what the city might look like in a year, or 2, or 10. She saw new towers rising, markets bustling, children playing in the streets without fear. She saw dragons overhead, once again icons of House Targaryen, but used in defense rather than blind conquest. And perhaps she even saw a day when the legacy of her father's madness no longer tainted the Targaryen name. As she moved through the corridors, passing unsullied guards who bowed at her approach. She felt an undercurrent of assurance in her step. The Iron Fleet was gone, her armies were victorious, and Regal yet lived. He, Drogon, and their queen forging a new era in Westeros. Every choice, every negotiation, every act of restraint contributed to that fragile future. She was no longer the naive girl of Pentos, nor the overwhelmed Khaleesi of the Dothraki Sea, nor the furious conqueror who nearly lost a dragon to scorpion bolts. She was Daenerys Targaryen, a ruler who had chosen to be cautious and cunning, saving her child from Euron's ambush, and in so doing, saving herself from the spiral of rage that once threatened to consume her. With Regal's survival, she carried the flame of hope forward. Though the road was difficult and the burdens immense, she would not falter. She would keep flying, keep building, and guide this realm toward the promise that had long eluded it. She could almost hear the distant roars of her dragons echoing in the high vaults of the keep, a reminder of the power at her command, and the responsibility that power demanded. If she had learned anything from the ashes of war, it was that dragons, like kingdoms, thrived under care, not fear. And so she pressed on, forging her legacy with each step, determined that the city she had taken and the dragon she had saved would both flourish in the light of a gentler, wiser reign.